Ross, is it like cuckoo? Like the ink? I don't know what this looks like.
The what? Really good. Do you want to take the jacket off?
No, I'm freezing, but I would. But oh well.
You run cold?
Yeah. I run cold. I run cold. All right.
Should we get started? Yeah. All right.
Yes.
So first, we'd just like to thank Zibby's Bookshop and Zibby Owens for hosting this fantastic event. My name is Diana Snyder Ritter. I am the chair of the associate board of Our House, which, as many of you know, is the largest grief support organization in Los Angeles. We help thousands of people each year cope with the death of a loved one. We have support groups. We've partnered with LAUSD for grief groups in schools. We have a camp for children dealing with the loss of a sibling or a parent. And tonight, I am absolutely thrilled to have Nicole Avant with us. Nicole is a producer, a writer, a philanthropist, the former ambassador to the Bahamas, and the author of Think You'll Be Happy, which delves into her experiences following the tragic death of her mother, Jacqueline Avant, in a home invasion. Jacqueline was also a beloved philanthropist, and she was the loving wife of Nicole's father, Clarence Avant, a legendary music manager and the former chairman of Motown Records. Nicole, I just want to extend my deepest condolences.
Thank you.
And I'm so excited to discuss this
I'm
book.
so happy to be here, and thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'd like to dive in.
Okay.
In your book, you mentioned that the grieving process after your mother's death surprised many because it didn't fit the traditional expectations of mourning. You write, "I knew after my mother's death, I was supposed to be in fetal position, wailing, gnashing my teeth. And there were times that happened, for sure, don't get me wrong. That was all anyone was expecting of me. And then, because I wasn't doing those things, I could sense the questions. Why are you not devastated? Why are you able to get up and do things?" Can you share with our audience some ways in which your grief manifested unexpectedly, but also how it showed up in some traditional ways?
Well, I think all of us in this room know that grief is not linear, and that grief is a lot of things. It's like an island, and you feel like you're alone, and you feel that no one else understands how you feel. And for me, I noticed there were days that like I said, sometimes I was in fetal position and I didn't want to move and I didn't want to get up and I didn't want to live. And then at the same time, I would have to remind myself that yes, there was a death and yes, it was tragic, but I also had to fight the feelings of dying myself before it's time for me to die. If that makes sense?
Yes.
Like I was like, I can't die. I can't, like, it's not time for me to die. And I'm literally dying inside, or I want to die. And so I had to fight those feelings all the time. And I think what helped me go through the grief was that I just decided to let it show up the way it was going to show up. Sometimes I was kicking and screaming and really pissed off. I cursed a lot. And other days I would just bawl uncontrollably. And then there were other days where I was very, very quiet and only wanted to be alone. And there were other days where I needed my friends, who were phenomenal, by the way. Like, my friends that showed up for me every single second of every single day changed everything. Even somebody making a meal for me, somebody running a bath for me, somebody not even saying anything and just putting their arms around me would change things. Because what I have learned is the more tragic the death, the less you say. Because there's really nothing to say. And no one, as we all know, no one knows what the fuck. Jamie, is that Jamie? Hi, Jamie. It's my girlfriend for a long time. Good to see you. Sorry about that. I'm like, wait a minute. And you knew my mom, you knew my parents, and sorry, I just lost my train of thought. But
no one knows what to say.
Yeah, no one knows what to say, like me. And what I've learned is that I love you is probably the greatest thing that I could hear over and over again, because it is like a healing balm. You really just want to know that you're loved and that you're not alone. And you do need hope. And I try, thank God I was raised, the way I was raised is that I was always anchored in hope. And because my parents loved history and celebrated their own history, and their parents, their parents, their parents, our whole, and all of my ancestors, it wasn't an easy ride. And they all went through hell and trauma. And so my mom raised us to say the best thing you can do with your life is to actually live a life worth living, because everybody sacrificed for you to have the freedoms that they didn't have. And they sowed the seeds of goodness, knowing that they weren't going to get a harvest. Everyone knew they were not going to get their voting rights, this right, this right, this right, but they still did the right thing to move life forward. And so that kept going on in my head too, which is, okay, yes, this terrible thing happened. However, it is a part of life. And my mom always used to draw like a circle like this when I was little. And she'd say, here's the circle of life. And people sometimes make the mistake of circling death next to it. But death goes in the circle of life. And it helps you get through everything when you understand, like, this is a part of life, no matter how difficult it is, traumatic it is, upsetting it is. Every single person on the planet is going to feel it, and it's the price we pay for loving.
Wow. I love that she drew that for you. That's so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
So the title of your book,
yes,
Think You'll Be Happy, refers to the last text message your mother sent you. I want to know, what do you believe she meant? But also, as you just spoke about, your family has experienced tremendous accomplishments, but also profound tragedies.
Mm-hmm.
But you've maintained a deep positivity throughout. Can you elaborate on the significance of the message, Think You'll Be Happy, and some moments in your life where this mantra was meaningful to you?
Yes. So for those of you who don't know the story, I titled the book Think You'll Be Happy, Moving Through Grief with Grit, Grace, and Gratitude, because Think You'll Be Happy were the last words that my mom said to me. So it was November 30th. There was the Oxford school shooting in Michigan. And I knew my mom would always, she was 81, and the last 10 years of her life, she could not understand school shootings in America. It's like, what are American kids doing to each other, murdering each other every day, it seemed like. And it was something that she really, was the one time where she couldn't just snap out of it and get back into her positive self. She'd get very, very disappointed. So this tragedy happens. I hear about it on the news. I call my parents immediately at 4:45. I remember exactly where I was. And my dad said, oh, your mom's resting. She's in such a sad mood. I don't know what's going on. I go, Dad, turn on the news. There was another school shooting. So later that night, I receive a text from my mom, and it's about a sweet potato pie that my father took. They brought me the sweet potato pie for Thanksgiving. And then because we didn't eat it, my dad, being my dad, took it home as a leftover. And my mom was so mortified by his behavior. She couldn't believe how rude he was. So she kept texting me saying, Nicole, all week from Thanksgiving until that day, come get your sweet potato pie. It's waiting for you. And I'm so mortified that your father did this and he has no manners and blah, blah, blah. And then so, true story, I started to write back very sarcastically. I was like, oh, Mom, you and this sweet potato pie, like that. And I swear on my life, I just heard my intuition said, do not send that text. She's not going to think it's funny.
Wow.
So I delete. And then I cleaned it up and I said, okay, I'll see how I feel and I'll come get the pie tomorrow. And I was just talking about the pie. And I gave her favorite emoji. It was the happy face with the 3 hearts. That was her favorite emoji. And then she wrote back, okay, think you'll be happy.
Wow.
I took a bath. I went to bed. 6 hours later, my husband calls. You have to get to Cedars-Sinai. Your mom's been shot. And I'm thinking, well, of course, I was so discombobulated. I'm like, what do you mean shot? Shot where? I didn't know what time it was. So I'm like, was she out to dinner? Where? He goes, Nicole, I don't know any of the details. I just know that your brother's been trying to call you. He got to me. I'm on my way. He was at a work retreat, and thank God it was still in Los Angeles. And I got to Cedars, and my dad was there, thank God, and my brother, and we waited, and it was like the movies. And then they come out, and they brought us into that room. And I just knew on the doctor's face, I'm like, and the whole time I'm thinking, you have got to be kidding me. Like, what? And then, of course, I'm still asking them. And then the police were there, and they said an intruder broke in. He had 4 houses to hit that night, and or 5, could have been more, but they had them all on his phone. My parents were one of them, and my mom happened to be up. You know, I always used to say, like, why are you up at 2:30 in the morning? Why am I getting texts from you always at 3 in the morning? She said, trust me, when you turn 80, you'll see. She's like, you don't sleep the same, and you just take naps early, and you get up late. And she loved doing her stuff. And so they had an encounter, 2 minutes, and it was over. And so her last words to me were, think you'll be happy. And I was writing a book on grit, grace, and gratitude is what I was doing in 2020. Then this happened in 2021, and I thought, well, I'm not going to put out a book on grit, gratitude, and grace. And then my publisher and I were talking about it, and I just happened to share that those were my mom's last words to me. And then all of a sudden, the light bulbs went off to everybody, because to your question, the answer is it became my mantra. It became my mantra of, no, of course, I'm not going to be happy every single second of every single day, but the intention to look for the good things in life so that so I can train my mind and have a new mindset of being grateful and thinking of happy things. And because it is a privilege to live. At the end of the day, look, life is messy and it's hard and it's a bitch half the time, but it's also really great. It really just is. It's a privilege. I think it's a privilege to be alive. And my dad always, you know, he has this famous saying, Nicole, you come with a number and you end with a number.
Wow.
What are you going to do with your dash? Everybody gets a dash, and their dash is their life. And some people get 3 weeks, 3 months, 3 years, 30 years. You just don't know. But you know, and my mom, I watched her in her life go through grieving moments, and I noticed what helped her was serving other people.
Wow.
And helping people through their grief and making sure that people didn't feel alone. And, you know, and she'd always say, she thought the best way you can honor someone's life is to try and celebrate that life as much as possible, as hard as it is. And you know, look, death is different for everybody, and not all, you know, it's just different, and it hits people in different ways. And I get that. And believe me, I don't think I'd be sitting here if this happened to me. There's a big difference that this happened when I was 53.
Yeah.
If I was 13 or 3 or 23 or even 33, I wouldn't have written this book. You know, thank God I was a young adult enough that I could have something to be able to really look at life and have a different perspective.
Yeah. Completely.
You know, so but like I said, it was days of complete pain and not wanting to move and not wanting to live and not wanting to smile. But then I also had a 92-year-old living with me. And I moved my dad in the day we brought him home from the hospital. And so it gave me something to live for. You know, it was like, my gosh, this man has lived 92 years and he was with my mom for 56 years and his heart is shattered. And I don't know, he's not going to be here forever. So the least I can do is try. And that helped me a lot, you know. And he did say one thing to me, and I will share. He said, one day I couldn't finish the book, and my dad was he was, you know, I mean, he was born in 1931, segregation, you know, it was a very racist time in the country. So for him, he's that very old school personality. Yeah. And he looked at me and he said, I go, I can't finish this book. Someone just murdered mom. I'm not going to finish this book. And he looked at me and he said, are you going to let this man take your life too?
Wow.
Is that what you're going to do right now? And it just stopped me completely in my tracks. I said, well, no, but he goes, no, I understand you're grieving and we're going to grieve together. But are you really going to, because if you just stop, he took your life too.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. He really got to the heart of it so
he's
quick.
straight to the point.
Yeah,
Typical
direct.
Clarence.
Well, as you described it,
yes,
he's a very
straight
direct,
to the, very direct,
very
direct. Yeah.
I love that. Well, speaking of your father, I'd like to talk about how he had this ability to recognize potential in people that everybody else seemed to overlook. You talk about who saw the potential in the Bill Withers song Lean on Me, which we know is a huge hit when everyone else said it wasn't going to be.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think he saw in your mother that set her apart and made her remarkable in his eyes?
It's a great question. I would say that it was her grit and her grace and her gratitude and her elegance that set her apart from anybody that he had ever met. Because like I said, he was born and raised in Jim Crow South. My mom was born and raised in Jamaica, Queens, New York. She comes from a mixed background. So my mom looked like most of you in this room. She, they passed for Italian. Both my grandparents were half, so they're both half white, half black, both sides. So my grandfather really just, he looks like an Irishman, he's like straight hair, blue eyes and white skin. But my dad said when he moved from the South to the North, it was if he was living in black and white and all of a sudden it was color.
Wow.
And he wasn't running from things and he wasn't scared all the time. And it was a completely different world. And then when my mom came into his life, as smart as my dad was, and he deserves all his accolades, I would never take anything away from him. But there's no way whatsoever that he could have moved through the earth without Jacqueline Avant. Absolutely not. There was just no way, because he wasn't emotionally equipped and mature enough to really, there was so much trauma that he had to go through.
Completely.
And I mean, he literally ran from the Ku Klux Klan. I mean, he talks about it in this documentary I made called The Black Godfather. I mean, when he said it like he was ordering at Starbucks one day. I'm like, wait, what? And he goes, no, grandma said, when the Klan comes, you lay down flat, you hold your breath, and you say it. I'm like, what are you talking about? He goes, but these things happen. That was my childhood. It just was. Like, we were taught not to look up and not to look up. I go, why? Well, because you don't know if you're going to see a friend or a family member hanging from a tree, because lynching was legal. So they saw it all the time. I mean, again, he was born in 1931. So it was a very different time. So, but he never lived in a victim mode and he never blamed anybody. And, my mom had a big world and was friends with everybody and every race and every background. And it was so great. And my dad was very linear. You were either black or you were Jewish. And that was it. Like he really had no other friends. At his memorial, I'm looking around. I'm like, black, 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 Jewish, 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 Jewish. There was no, and then everybody else who filled in the blanks. I'm like, my mom's friend, my mom's friend, my mom's friend. It was so funny how that's just the way that was his world.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, in terms of their dynamic, do you mind just telling the audience, for those who haven't read your book, I love the story about how he got into a disagreement with Bill Withers. He wasn't going to go to the concert and how your mom pushed him to go. Do you mind sharing that story?
The lesson in this story was you kind of have to just let go of the grudges and show up when you're supposed to be, wherever you're supposed to be at the time. And at the time, Bill Withers had all his hits. He had Ain't No Sunshine and Lean on Me and Grandma's Hands. And he had a big concert at Carnegie Hall. And it was the early 70s. And my father and Bill, typical, always, the artist always argues with the manager and they go back and forth. So my dad said, I'm not going to this fucking concert. Fuck him. I'm not. Blah, blah, blah. And he went on and on. And my mom just looked at him and she said, Clarence Avant, you get dressed and you get in this car and you're going to Carnegie Hall. It is Carnegie Hall. And my dad said, I don't care what it is. I'm not going. And he went on. And she finally got him in the car. She made him get dressed. And then Bill Withers famously yells out, is Clarence Avant in the house? I want to thank Clarence Avant for my career. And he went on and on and on. And my mom looked at him and she said, and you didn't want to be here tonight. And she was always having to, she's like, he's like a child. I have to just, but that's the one thing I loved about I always say he's Archie Bunker and my mom is Queen Cleopatra.
I love that.
And that's what their marriage was like.
I love that. That story I felt really exemplified their dynamic.
Oh yeah.
So at our house, one of the things we talk about is complicated grief, involving feelings such as sadness or anger along with guilt. So in your book, you write about confronting your mom with some complicated feelings about your past. You say, told your mom, there were always so many people at our house, and you and dad were always so busy supporting everyone around you that I feel like I had to fight for any leftover attention and affection. So did you have those complicated feelings when your mom died? Were you able to resolve this? And if so, how?
Yes, thank God. So my mom and I share a birthday. I was born on her 28th birthday, and we went through COVID, and then we had our last final birthday together. And she loved the book. How many of you know the book, You Can Heal Your Life by Louise Hay? You guys know that book? So my mom loved that book. And she gave it to me, years ago. And then we go to this lunch, and we get through COVID, and we go to lunch, and we celebrate our birthday. And she said, I've been thinking a lot about some things you said to me a couple of years ago, and I'd like to apologize. I every time I corrected your behavior, I was correcting your behavior, but I needed to tell you as a 6-year-old and as an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old that I was correcting your behavior and not correcting your soul. And she said, and I'm very sorry because I think I really pinched your heart. And I love that she said pinched my heart. And I was like, wow, Mom. And then but of course, my mother was like, but I was still a very, very good mother, a very good mother. And but she said, she goes, but COVID really had me just home like everybody else. And it made me look at myself in the mirror. And she had turned 80 right before the world shut down. She had just turned 80. We had an 80th birthday party for her. I actually had COVID. I could have killed everybody, but thank God nothing happened. And she just decided, this is the one thing that's bothering me that's still on my heart, and I don't like it. And I know it's hurt you, and I know you've been confused by it. And she said, I live the way I wanted to live, and I raise you well, but it doesn't mean that I shouldn't have taken your feelings more seriously. But she also, again, went into, now you're an adult and you should live your life the way you want to live your life. You do not have to model me, and you do not have to do anything your father and I did. But she said, for the time, we were a very prominent Black family in Beverly Hills, and I wanted to be the one to open our house for artists and entertainers and business people and blah, 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 to feel safe, and we could help them move along. She was a big believer in, when you get to the top of the mountain, you always should turn, she's like, yes, you can do your stupid dance if you want, but you have to turn around, because there's always going to be somebody else climbing up the same mountain. And it's so lonely at the top. So she said the best thing to do is, yes, celebrate yourself, but turn around and help the next person coming up. Yeah.
Such a special person. I'd like to talk about a theme of sacrifice. So when you were an ambassador, you faced some very difficult decisions, and sacrifice is a topic that often comes up in our support groups at our house. For example, should a newly widowed parent prioritize her career, her children? We all have to make sacrifices after a death. Can you discuss your thoughts on this as it relates to your experiences and the decisions you've made?
Yeah, I think sacrifice, it's not pretty and it's not fun, but it's necessary. And we all have to sacrifice. And I think it's personal for everybody of what you're going to sacrifice for what and what have you. For me, when I was working in the Bahamas, I was very excited to serve President Obama, and I was excited to serve my country. But I will admit, the marriage was, it was a new marriage. And Ted and I had dated a year. I mean, we met June 2008. We were married September 2009. And then I moved. And he's running his business here, and we were back and forth, and there were 2 teenagers, and it was just a lot of emotions. And then I just had to look at myself in the mirror one day after 2 years of serving and say, my marriage is about to fall apart. And I know it's just not this is really, we were running on empty, not because we didn't love each other. It's just that our energy was scattered. And there were 2 teenagers, and they were my stepchildren. So there were all these layers. So I made a choice to come home, and I'm happy I came home, but I was pissed when I left. And I hated leaving my job. I liked my job, and I was good at the job. And I was just pissed. and I was pissed that I had to sacrifice, but you do it. But then other things came in, to fill that up. But it didn't mean that, but at least I just owned the fact of like, oh, this is what it feels like, where you sacrifice. And sometimes it feels like shit.
Yeah.
And then sometimes it feels necessary. And my mom always used to say to me, just do, when you don't know what to do in life, do the next right thing. That's all she would say all the time. In one day, just say you have this one day, that's the only thing you have, do the next right thing in that day. And then it'll just take you where you need to go, which really did help me a lot. And then I had my father, I sacrificed, and a lot of people, I don't know if you guys, I'm sure some of you went through this. When my mom died, so many friends called me, were like, well, we know these homes that you can put your dad in, and your dad should go live here, and you should do this. I'm like, wait, what? I can take care of him. I'm fine. I'm good. But there were so many people who, in their minds, he was such a burden to me. And I'm like, but he's not a burden to me. But everyone then started judging me on that. Like, I can't believe you're letting your dad live with you. I'm like, letting my dad live with what? Like, this is just, at least that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to bring him home. And I wanted him to be with me. And I have the room and I have the resources. And it was the best 20 months I ever had, by the way. Because my dad traveled a lot. And I never had 20 months with him consistently. So we had breakfast and lunch and dinner, and he'd share his wisdom and he'd share stories. And then he was able to bring up lots of his old childhood trauma that he never dealt with, that all of a sudden he kept repeating stories. I'm like, oh, I know why he's repeating this. It's not resolved.
Yeah.
It's not resolved. So I would help him resolve things. And so I thought it was a beautiful way to end his circle of life. And he was going to be with me. But I did notice a lot of people wanted to tell me, like, you shouldn't sacrifice, you shouldn't give up your freedom, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. And I said, you can do what you want to do when your parent dies. I think everybody just needs to do what's good for that person. But the judgment was a lot. I just was the hardest part of the grief, was I just felt a lot of judgment.
Well, it sounds like it was a privilege for you, but a sacrifice for them.
Yeah.
Well, I'd also like to talk about how you've changed since your mother's death. In the book, you talk about that since her death, you've had a newfound sense of urgency in everything. Can you talk about how this sense of urgency has influenced your life?
I just really stopped taking a lot of things for granted, including life itself. And I don't know, all of a sudden, right when she died, you'd think, I look back and I'm like, why didn't I cancel all these commitments that I had? Some of them I did, but for the most part, I noticed I kept showing up for a lot of things, not because I was trying to stuff down the grief. But for me, it was the energy. I felt like, I don't know about you guys, but for me, I felt like I was drowning in quicksand. And I really felt like I was drowning. And I was like, oh man, if I don't get up and do something for somebody or continue my mom's legacy somehow, I'm going to drown. Like, I'm really just going to lose it. And I really did want to live. And my mom really, really loved being alive. She loved living. She loved serving. I looked at her day planner, which was like the worst part of any of this, as I got her day planner. I took it from the house. And that morning, that somebody came in and shot her, she had 4 things to do. One of them was, going to deliver books at a college and like all these extra books that she had at the house. And she was always doing those good, kind things. And I thought, I had like this new sense of living for her. And I think it was because the way she died, because it was so tragic and so mean and so cruel, that I thought, oh, I have to try and transmute this somehow, some way. You just gotta. But let me say this though, while I was that person, I was also that same person. I remember driving into my driveway and the grief took over out of nowhere. And I'm surprised I didn't break my hand. I just started slamming my wrist on the steering wheel, just screaming, just completely like a mad woman. I'm just like banging and I'm just sitting in the driveway and I'm thinking on the ring, I'm like, oh my God, I must look, I don't know what I look like. I'm screaming, I'm talking about, and it was purple. The veins were sticking out. I mean, I really hurt myself, but I had just gone and done something and delivered things on her behalf, and I felt so good. And then 2 seconds later, that grief came up and that anger came up, and I kind of kicked the shit out of myself, and and there's waves. And then the more and more I felt the feelings and let them out and did all that stuff, things started to get easier, with a little bit of time. Doesn't mean I'm not over it. And I don't think I'm ever going to be over it. And I think that my heart is always going to be in repair. And I've actually just decided that it's okay for our hearts to be in repair. Yeah. Oh, well, they're just in repair.
I love
It's not a judgment. It's like our hearts are in repair. It's okay.
I love that our hearts are in repair.
They're in repair.
Yeah. I feel like we need that on the wall in our house, because that's really what part of our philosophy is. We don't believe in the 5 stages of grief. We think it's bullshit.
It is bullshit.
That grief is going to be with you your whole life, and you're going to have anger. There's no order. I love that you're talking about that.
Yeah, there really is no order to it. And I think that's what stops a lot of us from actual grieving, is that we think it's supposed to be this week it's supposed to be this way, this week it's supposed to be this way. It just doesn't, life doesn't even work like that. So I don't know why everyone thinks that grief is going to work. Like, nothing works like that in life.
Completely. I'd like to ask you one last question, then we'll open it up to the audience. In your book, you recount one of your first thoughts about hearing the tragic event involving your mother. You say about the man who shot her, "Oh God, please don't let me hate this man. Give me the strength to not hate him." Can you share where you are on your forgiveness journey and how you were able to integrate forgiveness into the process of grieving?
Yes. So I should start by saying that I think forgiveness, and I wish there was just a different word, because it's such an old, barbaric, archaic word. But I understand what it means. For me, forgiveness is never, it's a mindset, it is never a feeling. And it's never about condoning bad behavior or making excuse for bad behavior. I just had to, when I said, "Oh God, please do not let me hate this man," I was trying to say, please do not let this be so all-consuming that he gets all of the attention, all of my energy, and my mom gets nothing, and her life gets nothing. Because then she lived 81 years, and she lived a really great life, and she did a lot of great things for a lot of people. But if I focused on the poison and drank the poison every day of hating him, her legacy wouldn't even be anywhere. Like, there would be no book. No one would be talking about all the great things that she did. It would all be so focused on somebody I don't know, somebody who is giving me nothing, is only taken away something. And the anger and the hatred and the disappointment and the frustration are such heavy energies, and they're natural to feel, yes, of course, at times. But I had to make a conscious decision every day that those energies were not going to drive my soul every single day. That the legacy of my mom, her goodness, her kindness, her quirkiness, all of it, that I was going to focus on her life and not the tragedy of her death. And he was getting nothing. Like, absolutely every time. And it doesn't mean he doesn't come in, but when he does, I immediately switch to my mom, and I switch to her life, and I switch to what I loved about her, and I switch to the things I respected about her. And that is how I keep my heart from being filled with so much poison towards someone I don't even know. And I just, every day I have to tell myself, like, I cannot unscramble this egg. Wow. I just can't. Like, there's nothing I can do. I can't undo him driving into Truesdale and breaking into their house and encountering my mom. If I could, I would, but I can't. So what can I do? And that's my thing every day. Like, what can I do? What am I in control of? And he definitely doesn't get to be a part of my thought process or a part of my heart, because I have a happy heart. I like my heart. So he doesn't get to sit in my heart.
I love your philosophy, and I think it speaks to what we talk a lot about in group is people replay the moment of the person they died's death. If only I had picked up the phone. If only I didn't have my dad come to the birthday party. If only this, if only that, if only I didn't cross the street with my child that time and got hit. We find that people replay these moments again and again and again, and they get stuck in these grief loops. And I think what you're really speaking about is your ability to actively shift your mindset.
So that did happen to me. And for 9 months, and I wasn't even in the house, obviously, for 9 months, every single night before I went to sleep, my brain went into the room and it played out a movie as if I was watching, and I saw him take the rock and throw it into the window, and I saw them encounter, and I saw, like, it was a movie.
Yeah.
Every single night. And then finally, after 9 months, I was like, okay, well, hold on. I need something else. Like, I need to take, I don't know. I have to stop this, which I did. But I had 9 months of that. Yeah. And it was torturous. But I also figured, and I read a little bit, but it's like the brain was trying to comprehend. You try to make sense of something, and you always that what if.
Yes, exactly.
You know, and thank God I wrote that text. Like, I'm telling you, I heard my intuition. If I had sent the text that I was going to send to my mom, I mean, I would not be sitting here.
Yeah.
I would not be sitting here. So, and I think, you know, my friend Steve had passed away. He took his life in 2020. Steve's a little older, so he was 50 something at the time. He had battled with depression. They were changing his medication on and off. And I remember kind of, you know, during COVID, like, oh, he was reaching out a lot, but I didn't connect that he was reaching out because his aloneness was much different than mine, because he was depressed and I'm not depressed. So I didn't understand what he was really going. So he'd say, you know, let's go just pick up lunch and we'll eat on the roof of my car. And then he'd go do it by himself and he'd send me pictures. And I'd say, oh, I know, but this COVID thing, you know, we'll do it next week. We'll do it in 2 weeks. We'll do it in 2 months. We'll get together. And then it was on the news that, you know, he jumped off a building and took his life. And ever since that happened, that's what helped me change my mindset in responding to my mom. Because I never took his life for granted, and I never wanted to be that person again. Because, like I say in the book, like even not responding is a response. Mm-hmm. And I just didn't want to be that person anymore that just doesn't respond. You know, I have to just be a little more conscious of. None of us know what anyone's going through.
Completely.
Right? Well, we just don't know. Like, none of us. I don't know any of your stories, but I know that they're sad. And I know they've affected you. But so all of us are walking this life and these paths, and we just don't know what people are going through.
Completely.
We just don't. I mean, right now, there's lots of women sitting in children's hospitals all around the nation, all around the world, and watching their child leave. And we don't know when we're honking at them or driving by, or, you know, we just don't know. It's just like, I've learned to I'm trying to do my best. I'm not perfect at it, but I do try to just tread lightly, just tread gently. Completely. Because everybody is going through something and grieving something at some point.
Completely. And I think hearing that you've experienced what so many people in this room have experienced firsthand, replaying memories of that night. That's something I experienced myself. Hearing that you have gone through that it's normal, someone in your position. I just want to thank you for normalizing the experience of grief, because what we find, it's just not talked about enough.
No, it definitely isn't. That's why I wrote the book. I felt so alone. I was like, well, I'm just going to put this out there and hopefully someone will pick up this book and they won't feel alone, because it's the worst feeling, and you just feel so alone. Like I told you earlier, I picked up People magazine. I never read People magazine before, and I started reading about everybody else's all of a sudden I didn't feel alone anymore. I'm like, oh, that's terrible. But it made me feel like, okay, whew, okay, I'm not the only one. You know, the next week I'm like, oh, that's horrible. It's like, oh my God, you know.
I get it. That's why I found the Kardashians. They were the same age when my dad died. And I said, if they could make it and become the Kardashians, and this young one was my age, she was 20 when her dad died, then I could do it too. Right. And that's how I found them.
I mean, it's,
we all find something.
You find something.
Well, I'd
Yeah.
love to open it up to some questions from our audience.
Hi.
Thank you for being here. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your relationship with your brother as you both experienced something that was inherently intertwined and at the same time individual, just how you related to each other as you watched each other experience this.
That's a good question. We experienced grief very differently. And we kind of were on our own separate islands, checking in on each other, but it was a very different, we were in a different space. I talk about it in the book, where in the hospital, when they announced that my mom did not make it through surgery, you would have thought that somebody, like a hunter, was in the hospital and shot my brother. Like, he wailed like an animal, to the point where I got so paranoid because my dad is sitting there. My dad kind of slumped over to me and I was like, get Alex out of the hospital. Just, I talked to his girlfriend. I'm like, get him home. And we talk now a lot more, and we talk all the time because, I'm all he has. But it was very different for us. And I had to learn to let him grieve in his own way. And he allowed me to grieve in my way. And it was just very different. I think he was very, he just kind of went in and stayed home a lot. And I was more, but I was also with my dad, which gave me, my dad was at my house. So I had things to occupy my mind with and heal with my dad. And Alex was kind of in and out of the process. Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, please.
Hi. Yep.
Yeah,
You.
Okay, yeah. Thank you so much. This is really beautiful and inspiring. I love that you're involved in so many things. I volunteer for the grieving teens and young adults. Some people I find are so debilitated they can't even take like one step
I know.
forward. What advice might you have for someone who just feels so stuck? Like, volunteer first, get the money together first, go on the trip first. There's no right answer, but I want
Right.
to lead to you.
It's so different for everybody, but I love that you use the word debilitating, because it really is. Like, I felt debilitated. I felt that. And for me at least, I was like, okay, let me try to go and do something for somebody else, so that you don't feel that it's only you. And, somebody always has it worse than us. Everybody has it worse than somebody. And it doesn't take away from or negate from the way you feel, but it does remind you that life does go on. And my mom really was great at teaching me that the best way to honor someone's life is to really live your life. Just live. Just at least have the intention to just, even if it's one thing, one day. And sometimes it's a vacation, sometimes it's volunteering. My friend, lost her parents in an accident when we were in college. She she was in law school, and then now she only rescues dogs, and she rescues senior dogs, and she just does. And that's what kept her from being debilitated. That was her thing. And everything is different for somebody, but the idea of, again, dying before it's even your time to die is what's really sad to watch. So my advice to everybody is at least try to find just one thing for somebody one day, and hopefully it'll just be a domino effect and help you get out of at least feeling debilitated. Yeah. Exactly.
Please.
Yeah.
I'm curious, in your journey to get justice for your mom's
Mhm.
death, was that a helpful part of your healing journey at all, going through the courts and
We got very lucky where we thought we were going to go to trial, and he then pled no contest, and so we didn't have to go to trial. But it was still very difficult, and I put the letter that I wrote to the judge, I put it in the book. And it was, while it doesn't take away the pain still, I was just very grateful that this person is not on the streets to do this to another family. And that is what I asked the judge for, of just, please, may he spend the rest of his natural life in jail, because he doesn't deserve to be free. I don't think. And but more importantly, he's a dangerous human being and will do this to somebody else. And I don't want any other family to experience what we've experienced. So it did feel like it was the day where I remember writing in my journal, I'm like, Justice for Jackie Day, Justice for Jackie. You know, he was served 130 years, and I felt some relief, but it didn't. It felt relief for a couple minutes, and then and then I got angry again. You know, so yes. Did you ever?
Yes. First, Diana, I am currently a member in our house
Oh,
yes.
out in the valley.
thank you for coming.
We're kind of letting the process happen. It's taken a little while for the group to get together, but
Yeah.
I'm just going to see what happens because it doesn't change anything, but you don't know. It's a hard, I don't know if you went through it or this was your group therapy, but I just sincerely want to thank you for giving me hope.
Oh, thank you for
I was
saying
given
that.
your book on Thanksgiving by my sister.
Oh,
Wow.
Her name is Susie. You know who she is.
yes.
And I read it. I started to read it over the weekend, and I called a friend of mine on Sunday. They were spending Thanksgiving alone. And I said, my sister will welcome anybody.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, I called to check on them, and because they just spent it alone, they'd been traveling a lot. And I said, they were talking. I started telling about the book I started to read, and I told them the name, and then wait a minute. And his wife has experienced the loss of her father in a plane crash, and she's not been able to get over it. But she was watching a movie that was dedicated to your mother.
Oh,
The Crown.
wow.
Is it The Crown?
Yes. Oh, yes. Bridgerton. Yes.
And
yes.
She found the dedication hit her, and she took a deep dive into Jacqueline Avant.
Oh my
And
God.
then I'm talking to Peter, her husband, about this book I'm reading. I gave him the name of it. He's starting to put two together. He's like, we took a deep dive this weekend.
Wow.
On who she was.
Yeah.
And my story was very similar. It was a home invader at 2:30 in the morning.
Same time.
On a Wednesday morning.
Same.
I was pulled out of the house by the sheriff. My son, I saw him on a stretcher. I needed to know that, as you did, that he didn't die at home. He died at the hospital.
Yes. Yeah.
It took me 2 weeks to find the surgeon and talk to him. And he got my message and called me back immediately. But I had to spend, they kept me in the dark for hours at the sheriff's station. And finally, they give my phone back. And it starts to ring off the hook. And there was, Channel 7 was at my house. And there was one man that I still to this day can't get the anger out, decided to comment and had all the facts wrong. And Terrible. It was disparaging. But
yeah,
I think if there's, in the book, there's so many beautiful mantras and thoughts that you put in the margin. Is there one that has come up over the months that you've been sharing that comes up more often or that means something to you?
It's a great question. The one that comes up all the time and that people write me about is I have that saying, grief is the receipt from the universe that you have loved and been loved. And it's your receipt. And it just, it's like the price we pay for love. And we all pay a price for loving.
That was one of the things that I wrote down. But one of the things that hit me in the book, I think it was, it's the one that there's angels among us.
Yes.
And I can't tell you, that experience is your mother passing on the book to help that person. But it gave me so much hope. And you know that the day that I finished the book, I finished it the morning of December 1st. And I looked on page 268.
Wow.
That date is written right there.
Yeah.
And I looked and that's
just
today.
December 1st.
But I didn't remember what it was. And then I looked at it again and
I
reread it and I realized that was, for all of you, the day that Jacqueline passed.
Yeah.
And so the book is anyway, I lent it to my friend and I got myself another copy, and as you can see, it's all marked up. But, again, it's I'm still in the process. It happened in March 22.
Yeah.
There are, again, it's very, there's a lot of similarities with
Yeah.
the home invasion.
It's
And
yeah.
we know
Thank
who
you.
the intruder was, but the DA in this town
Ugh.
won't prosecute.
What?
I'm so sorry.
So I don't want to be,
yeah.
I don't want to
No,
stand
I'm
in a
sorry.
political stance, but I'm just
Yeah.
saying.
No, I know.
Thank you for sharing your
And
story.
I don't focus on him.
Yeah.
I don't.
Thank you.
I focus on his life and my life getting back on track.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
Thank you for
Thank
sharing
you.
that.
For hope.
Oh, thank you.
you.
God bless you.
We have time for one more. If anyone has a follow-up to that powerful
Yes.
story.
So, this is not, I'm so sorry for your loss. My heart goes out to you. There are people that you know in your own family that want you to put a period on your grief. Yeah, my husband passed away, and I've had the 24 weeks of our absence really been invaluable, and I've made some good connections, but it's where I can be truthful and honest and authentic about what I'm feeling. And like you said, I've got great days and just moving along, and then it hits you.
Mm-hmm.
But I found it kind of sad, and I don't know what to do about it, that I can't talk to my sisters about it. They want me to be over it, and they give me a lot of platitudes. Well, you were married a long time, and
Yeah.
lucky that. And I find myself just twisting inside, and then I find myself pretending. Like, yeah, you're right, so how are you? And I put on this kind of funny facade, and then when I hang up the phone, I do feel alone. I get on the phone with one of the wonderful women I've met in the group, and it helps a lot. But there's this, you can't fit a circle.
There's no
into a square.
period.
I can't. I
Yeah.
guess I'm trying to accept that I can't enlighten her. I keep trying to find a way that she could understand that grief is an extension of love, and it will always be here. And sometimes it'll be more acute, and other times it won't.
Right. Yeah. And some people know that, and some people have to learn, and but there is no period really to it. It just becomes part of our journey. But like you said, some days are easier than others. And, I have found that too. And I just talk to other people now about it because they just will not understand. My husband actually did that in the beginning. He was like, you can't just let this consume our life. I'm like, she was just murdered 6 weeks ago. I could talk about it as much as I want. What are you talking about? But again, in his brain, he couldn't even process what happened. He was going through his trauma in his own way. So I think that's what I mean by everyone treading lightly. It's just, let people do what they have to do. And it's very different. Some people lose a child, and that's very different than losing a parent. And that's very different than from losing a sibling. So we can't judge it all. Just let it be the way it's going to be for the person and respect the person's heart. And I'm sorry that some people just genuinely don't understand. They just,
I think it's important to share and be able to get it out, because that's what helps.
Well, I did have somebody write me and say, I'm writing you to let you know that I now know how to deal with people who are grieving. I'm not grieving myself, but I now learned what not to say. And through your story, she was like, oh no, I've done this, and I said this, and I did this. And she said, I just happened to pick it up about grit, grace, and gratitude. She was like, and then I read the story, and she said, I just want to thank you, because she was doing the same thing that, your sister or your friends or somebody are saying, well, oh, you had a good life, and at least you had this many years, and at least you had this. And it's always at least. Well, okay. But I think people just, to your point, we don't talk about it enough to share with people. When people would always call me like, please let me know if there's anything I can do. Please let me know what I can do. I'm like, no, I'm actually not going to give you something to do.
Yeah.
I don't have my brain cannot even think. Well, now I have to think of what you should do for me.
Oh my God.
Are you fucking kidding me? I'm like, and then my friends were great. They just showed up. My friends showed up. They had food, they had wine, they had tequila, they had this. I mean, it was just, she walked in, she was looking at me, she's like, I have Xanax. That's all I have. And it was the best. I go, I don't even take Xanax. She goes, oh, you'll want this one. Because I was like, no, I take holy basil. She's like, yeah, not now. And she was right. I'm like, yeah, there was a murder. She's like, yeah, the holy basil is not going to help that. You might need a Xanax. And, but they showed up and they were driving around looking for a home for, a place to rest for my mom. She did everything. They did their wills, they had their insurance. And the one thing was, lay us to wherever you want. I'm like, where the hell am I going to, I don't, so, they're with all their friends now. And, but I had friends driving around looking for resting spots for me. They were getting death certificates because, as we all know, there's a business to death that no one talks about. That's like a nightmare.
Yes.
When you can't get this because I need 10 death certificates and you're not going to get your money because I don't have this. I'm like, what? So my friend stayed on the phone with the county and got the death certificates and figured out how many I would need and got the extra ones because someone's going to lose this one and you won't get I couldn't move the body from the coroner. I couldn't move her from LA coroner to, I'm like, what? Where is she? And they're like, well, we can't move the body until you give us this document. Where did she go to high school? I'm like, where did she go to high school? Does that matter? I didn't even know that mattered. I'm like, what? Okay. I mean, on the death certificate, like high school, what's the name of the high school? I'm like, I cannot believe that she graduated high school in 1957 and it's 2021 and this matters. But okay.
Unbelievable.
Okay. It's unbelievable.
I appreciate you talking about these intricacies that everyone in this room has been through because it really, again, normalizes this for all of us that you had to go through this because these things are so hard to move through, and just knowing that you're not alone is just so helpful. And I have one follow-up question, which is, in the book, obviously Clarence is still alive and that gave you an immense sense of purpose. How have you been since his death and since coping with that, insanely instrumental figure in your life?
Thank you for asking. And I didn't realize up until a couple of weeks ago that I really hadn't been able to grieve my dad. Like I went on a book tour, like he died August 13th and we did a memorial October. By the way, when my dad died, his two best friends died the same time.
Wow.
So they all met in New York in the 60s. They were all in the record business. It was Jerry Moss, who had A&M Records. That was my dad's best friend. And then Abe Summer was the lawyer. And my dad died Sunday, Jerry died Tuesday, and Abe died Wednesday. And we were not prepared. None of the kids were talking because none of us were telling each other. And so when my dad died, then they called. And then, I was at Jerry's funeral before I buried my dad, but thank God they're all in the same place. But it was just, those were some of the people that I was actually going to call to tell that Clarence had passed on. And then they died. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. Like all three of you? I mean, it's like, okay. And I just started to really, and then I went on this book tour and did all this stuff. So I got very sick a couple of weeks ago. And I realized, because I am completely shut down. I haven't even grieved my father. I haven't grieved his best friends. I haven't really processed that my dad's not here. And he lived in our house, like I said, for 20 months. So it's, I wake up every day used to this routine. I'm like, he's not here. I'm not making him breakfast anymore. I'm not. So there was this complete emptiness. And I'm just now, again, it helped that it did help that he did live a very full life and he was 92 and he was at home. I got him out of the hospital, thank God. And I was like, I want him to die around his books, his art, his thing. And I had Frank Sinatra playing and Duke Ellington on loop, just 24 until he just passed over with his music.
Wow.
And but like I was so in the thick of running around that I didn't really grieve him yet. And I just started to really grieve him. Like I really miss him.
I think we can all empathize with that. And I'm thinking of your father, even because you talked about in the book how he used to read the paper, and what would he say? You'd be like, "Why are you reading the obituary?" He had this
So
great
true
line.
story. You could actually Google it. It's hilarious, actually. He every single day. So all my life, I would go get his New York Times. He had the New York Times come every day to the house. And since I was 3 years, I'd go outside, I'd get the newspaper for him, and I'd bring it in. It was just this thing, the ritual I had. So he would love the obituary column. I'm like, why do you read the obituary column every day? He's like, I just love reading about people's lives and how they lived. And this person's a teacher, and this person did this, and he had 5 children, and he knew everybody's life. So about 5 months before he passed away, I go, Dad, when I was trying to make him laugh that day, I go, when you die, you're going to be in the New York Times obituary column. He's like, oh, please. They're not going to write about me. I'm like, I bet you they will. He goes, I don't know. I go, you'll probably have the whole back page. He goes, oh, stop it. He's laughing. He's like, you're crazy. You're crazy. And then what do you think happened? Wow. He had the whole back page when he died. And then he had the front page of the LA Times. So when we buried him, I took the New York Times the day that he died. The morgue came, they came to pick him up. And I went outside, and the guy must have thought I was nuts. I'm like, can you hold on 1 second before you drive away? And I ran outside like I did as a little girl, and I picked up his New York Times, and I put it in the car with him. And then when we buried him, it's next to him. Like I put that New York Times. So I just was like, I had the LA Times or the New York Times.
Wow.
But he was fascinated with people's stories. And his whole thing was, it's not about fame. It's not about all this, like he didn't understand social media, any of that stuff. Mm-hmm. And he said, it's always about the people. It's never about the things. You don't take shit with you when you go, nothing. He goes, when I die, you're going to see, you're going to take me away, and I'm hopefully going to have some clothes on, and that's it. Like you do not leave with anything. And so he'd always say, collect the really good people in your life. Collect the people versus so many things. He's like, I think you're all trying to fill up your lives with things. He goes, and you should fill them up with really as many great people as you can. Wow. And so, yeah.
Your parents were amazing, great and talented. They really, they knew how to hit the jackpot. I'm like, oh my gosh, these amazing friends.
They were, batshit crazy in the best way. And they really lived on purpose. That's what I take away from their life, is that they lived on purpose and they wanted to make positive differences in people's lives. And they definitely did that. And that's what they wanted their legacy to be, that they left a meaningful and significant mark on life. And my mom used to say, just try to make whatever space you find yourself in, try to make it better than the way you found it. That's it. So that's all we could do. Do you have time? Anybody else?
Much. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Can I ask you what happened with your family?
My dad died of a heart attack
Like
on
that.
Thanksgiving night. Horrible, in front of all of us.
In front of you.
Just like, not a home invasion, of course, but like 1 second, bam. Oh, please. Oh, yeah. The book, everyone, the book is for sale up front. And Nicole, would you
I will sign.
She will sign copies. So please, and 10% of sales go to our house.
Oh, you guys, okay, then buy the book, please, for our house. I mean, please. Where is it? Up here?
Right up front. Right by the cashier.
Okay.
So I totally